Ida Crane came to Sutter's Crossing in the first week of November with a name that was not the name she had been born with, and a history she had learned to carry the way you carry something breakable, carefully, with both hands, and never where anyone could see the effort. She had been Ida Crane for 4 years. Before that, she had been someone else in a county 3 days' ride east, and the distance had been the point. She was 31 years old, and she had a certificate from a commercial college in the territory capital that said she could keep accounts, and she had kept accounts for 2 employers since leaving the East County. And both times she had moved on before the questions caught up with her, which was not the same as running, though she understood how it looked. The post at Sutter's Crossing was at the Grain Cooperative, 2 days a week and the full week at harvest, keeping the ledgers and managing the settlement accounts for 11 member operations in the valley. She had answered the advertisement by post and received a letter back from a man named Gerald Foss, who managed the cooperative and who had checked her references, which were real, and who had not asked anything she had not been prepared for. She arrived on a Wednesday. Gerald Foss met her at the stage and walked her to the cooperative office and showed her the ledger system, which had been kept by his wife for 6 years before her eyesight began to fail, and which was orderly and precise, and asked to be continued in the same way. Ida looked at the ledgers. She said they were good work. Gerald said his wife would be glad to hear it. He showed her the desk and the lamp and the stove and the key to the back door, and he said she was to use her own judgment about hours, as long as the accounts were current, on the first of each month. She thanked him, and he left, and she sat at the desk in the quiet office, and looked at the window and the main street beyond it, and the particular quality of a town that does not yet know it has a new person in it. She had done this before. She knew how to enter a place. She found lodging at the house of a woman named Berta Cole, a retired school teacher who kept 2 rooms and asked no questions that were not about practical matters, and who had the good sense to understand that a woman who paid her rent on time and kept her room clean was a woman worth having in the house. The room faced east and had a good stove and a window that she could leave open in the morning without the street noise coming through, and she put her things away with the efficiency of someone who had put things away in rented rooms many times, and knew how to make a space functional without making it personal. The first person she met, who was not Gerald Foss or Berta Cole, was a man at the cooperative on her second day. She was at the desk working through the settlement ledger for the August harvest, when the back door opened and a man came in with a query sheet about his operations allocation. He was perhaps 43, tall in the way of men who work land and do not think about it, with a face that had been in all weathers long enough to have made its peace with them. He set the query sheet on the counter and looked at her with the uncomplicated directness of someone who has come for information and intends to get it and go. She took the sheet and found his account in the ledger and answered the query and handed the sheet back. He looked at the answer. He looked at her. He said the number was different from what he had been told in August. She said the August settlement had been corrected in September, when the co-op revised the moisture adjustment, and she showed him the correction line in the ledger with her finger on the entry. He looked at it. He said all right. He picked up the sheet and left. That was the first conversation. His name was John Pryor, and she learned it from the account header, not from him, because he had not offered it and she had not asked. The cooperative had 11 member operations, and she learned them in order of their account, numbers which was the way the ledger ran, and John Pryor was account 7. She began to know the operations by their patterns before she knew anything about the people who ran them. Which accounts settled early, which ran to the last day, which had the kind of variance that spoke to a difficult year, and which had the kind of variance that spoke to poor planning. Account 7 settled on the 4th of each month without fail, 2 days early, and the figures it submitted were always exact. The decimal points carried to the correct place. The moisture readings taken from the same instrument year over year, so the data was comparable. This told her things about the man, before she had spoken to him more than once. He came to the cooperative 6 times in the first 2 months, always with a purpose, always with his query sheet already filled out, always looking at the ledger entry she showed him with the complete attention of someone who trusts numbers over explanations. He did not make conversation. She did not offer it. This was comfortable in the way that two people who have both decided conversation is something to be earned find each other comfortable without knowing why. It was in the 3rd month that Celia Granger came by the cooperative on a Tuesday morning. She came with the warm and practiced manner of a woman who has decided she is performing a kindness and has organized her face accordingly. She said she wanted to introduce herself, and she said she had heard Ida was new in town, and she said a few things about the cooperative and the valley that were informational in the way of things said to fill the space before the actual purpose. Then she said she hoped Ida would feel welcome here, and she paused in the particular way of someone about to say the thing they came to say. And she said that small towns had long memories for certain kinds of situations, and that a woman coming alone from another county without family connections was something people wondered about, and that she was saying this as a friendly word, not as a criticism. She smiled at the end of this as though the smile could absorb what had preceded it. Ida set her pen down and looked at Celia Granger with the patience of a woman who had been in this conversation before, in different rooms with different women who had arranged their faces the same way. She said she was glad to hear she was welcome, and that the accounts were current, and Gerald Foss seemed satisfied, and that she hoped Celia would pass that along if anyone was wondering about the cooperative's business. Celia's smile held a moment longer than it was comfortable holding. She left. Ida picked her pen back up. From across the room, Gerald Foss, who had been at the far filing cabinet through the whole of it, pulled out the drawer he had been looking for and went back to his desk without a word. He was her ally, and he had never said so, which was the right way to be an ally, and she recognized it. The thing about John Pryor that she had not accounted for was the questions he did not ask. She had her answers ready. She had refined them over 4 years into something smooth and plausible and complete enough that no one had found the edge of it, and the answers stayed ready because they were always about to be needed, and with Pryor they were never needed, and the never needing was more disorienting than the asking would have been. He came to the cooperative in January with a query about the spring allocation, and she showed him the projection figures, and he looked at them, and said the north acreage was going to run different this season because he was changing the rotation. She asked what rotation. He told her. She adjusted the projection and showed him the revised figure. He looked at it and said that was what he thought. He did not ask where she had learned to read rotation data. He did not ask anything that was not about the account. She gave him the corrected sheet. He folded it and put it in his coat and left, and she sat at the desk after he had gone and looked at the ledger and did not immediately pick up the pen. That was the first time she had noticed the quality of his not asking as a thing in itself, rather than simply an absence. The weeks found their shape after that. He came on his account days, and she had the ledger ready, and they developed the particular efficiency of two people who have learned each other's rhythm without discussing it. She would have the relevant folio open before he reached the counter, and he would have read the query sheet through before he set it down. So neither of them spent time on the parts that did not need it. She noticed that he did not treat her like someone who needed the cooperative explained to her, which several of the other member farmers had done in the early weeks, with the patient condescension of people who have decided they know what someone understands before they have tested it. He simply brought his questions and took her answers and went back to work, and this was a form of respect she had not been offered as often as she might have wished. Gerald Foss told her in February that the membership had remarked on the accounts, and that they had not remarked this way before, and that he was grateful to have her. He said it in the manner of a man who says a thing once because it is true and does not feel the need to decorate it. She thanked him and went back to the ledger, and that was all that needed to be said. It was a Tuesday in February, cold enough that the stove in the cooperative office was working at full capacity when he came in with a query about the seed account, and she pulled the ledger and found the entry, and the entry was wrong. Not her error. It had been a carry-over mistake from the previous year's system, the kind that compounds quietly if you don't know to look for it. She found it because she had been working backward through the prior year's accounts for exactly this reason, and she told him the figure he had been settling against for 2 years was incorrect in his favor, meaning the cooperative owed him the difference. She put the corrected figures in front of him. He looked at them for a long moment. He looked at her. He said she had found a mistake that benefited her employer, not herself. She said it was the correct figure. He said he was aware of that. He said he had had an accountant for this account before her for 8 years, and the man had never caught it. He said it without accusation. He said it the way you say something you are simply noting. She said the prior system had not been organized to catch that type of carryover. He looked at the ledger. He looked at the window. Then he looked at her. He said, "Would you have dinner with me?" And the question sat in the room with the same plainness as everything else he had ever said in it. And she looked at him and said, "Yes." He said, "Saturday." She said, "All right." He left. She sat at the desk for a while after, not picking up the pen, which was becoming a pattern she had noted. She went to Berta Cole's room that evening and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the east window and thought about the last 4 years, which she did not often permit herself to do. She had left the East County because of a man, which was not the part she told people. The part she told people, when they asked, was that she had left for a better position, which was also true. The fuller truth was that she had been engaged to a man in the East County who had turned out to be already married to someone else in another county, and that she had not known this until the other woman had come to find her, and that the finding had been public in the particular and lasting way of things that happen in front of witnesses. She had not done anything wrong. That had not protected her from what followed, which was the particular cruelty of a community that was uncertain where the fault lay and resolved the uncertainty by distributing it. She had left because staying had stopped being possible. She had carried the story for 4 years in the sealed-off way you carry something that has cost you more than you have finished paying. She had not told it to anyone in 4 years because she had not found anyone she trusted with the weight of it, and she had stopped expecting to. Dinner was at the hotel on the south end of the main street. He was there when she arrived, which she noted. He stood when she came in, which she also noted, because it was the gesture of someone who had been raised to stand and did so without thinking, which told her something. They ordered. They talked about the cooperative, and about the rotation he was changing, and about the winter that was holding longer than the valley usually expected. The talking was easy in the way that talking is easy when neither person is performing anything, and she found she was less careful than she usually was. Not careless, but less careful, which was a different thing. He asked about the prior counties where she had worked. She told him. He asked how she had learned account work. She told him that too, the commercial college, the first position, the second. He listened in the way he did everything, with full attention, and without taking up more space than the listening required. He did not ask why she had moved from the first county to the second, or from the second to Sutter's Crossing. The not asking was there again, and she was aware of it. And she let the dinner come to its end without offering what he had not asked for. And she went home and sat at the east window and stayed there a long time in the cold dark. He came to the cooperative the following Tuesday, which was not one of his account days. He had no query sheet. He stood at the counter and looked at her and said he had a question that was not about the ledger. She set the pen down. He said he had been made aware, through the particular mechanism by which small towns transmit information, that there were questions circulating about where she had come from and why, and that the questions were taking on a shape he did not think was accurate, and that he wanted her to know he had said as much to the people doing the circulating, and that he had not found it necessary to speculate about the accurate version because it was not his to speculate about. He said this the way he said everything, plainly and with the weight only on the words that needed it. She looked at him across the counter. She had heard about the circulating. Gerald had mentioned it with the careful indirection of someone alerting without alarming. She had been managing it the way she always managed it, with composure and patience, and the knowledge that it would either pass or it would not, and that her conduct was the only answer she had available. She looked at this man who had just told her he had stood in the path of something on her behalf without making it into anything more than a statement of fact. She said she would tell him the real version if he wanted it. He said he did not need it. She said she knew that. She said she was offering it anyway, she told him. All of it without the smoothed-over version, without the edits she had made for plausibility and distance. She told him about the man in the East County, and the other wife, and the public finding, and what had followed it. And she told it in the same flat, declarative way she worked through ledger corrections, because the facts were the facts, and she had decided to say them. He listened from the beginning to the end without interrupting. When she finished, the room was quiet with the particular quality of quiet that comes after something true has been said in it, and he was looking at her with the same direct attention he gave to ledger entries, which was not the same as looking at her without feeling. It was looking at her as though feeling required accuracy, and he intended to be accurate. He said, "You did not do anything wrong." She said no. He said the situation had cost her anyway. She said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am sorry for that." She held it. Not the sorry she had been given by people who were apologizing for their own discomfort, but the sorry of someone who understood exactly what had been lost and was not trying to make it smaller or easier. She picked up the pen. She said she appreciated that. He stayed at the counter a moment longer. He said Saturday, if she was willing. She looked up. She said all right. He nodded and went out, and the cold air from the open door moved through the office and settled, and Gerald Foss at the far cabinet turned the page of whatever he was reading and said nothing, which was exactly right. She went to Berta Coles that evening and made tea and sat in the chair by the east window and did not read and did not work the accounts she had brought home and did not do anything except sit with what had happened in the office that afternoon, which was that she had told someone the whole truth and the room had not changed around her when she did it. The fire in the stove in Berta's sitting room moved the way it moved every evening, and the street outside went through its last sounds in the usual order, and she sat in the chair and understood that she was waiting for something to go wrong, and that it had not gone wrong, and that this was its own kind of adjustment to make. She had been waiting for 4 years for the moment when the cost would be collected again, and she had kept herself ready for it the way you keep yourself ready for a sound you have heard before, and do not want to be caught without your footing when you hear it again. She sat until the tea was cold and the stove had settled and the street was entirely quiet, and then she went to bed, and in the morning she was at the cooperative desk before Gerald arrived, and the accounts were open, and her pen was in her hand, and the day went the way days went, which was to say it went forward. The spring came on slowly, and then with the urgency that spring always brought to a farming valley, and the cooperative accounts filled with the particular activity of a season starting, allocation queries and seed settlements and projection revisions, and Ida worked the ledgers through all of it with the same precision she had brought in November. She and John Pryor had dinner on Saturdays, which had become the arrangement without either of them announcing it, and they had walked the South Road after church twice, and she had been to the Pryor operation once to look at the rotation he had described, because she wanted to understand the account data in the context of the actual land, and he had shown her without ceremony and answered her questions about the soil without simplifying them. She was learning the valley the way she had learned every place she had lived, through its patterns, through what the ledger said about who its people were, through the particular quality of the roads after rain. She was also learning that she had stopped waiting for the questions. The questions had not come, and the not coming had changed something in the way she held herself in the town, the way you stop bracing for a sound that does not happen and eventually realize you have been breathing differently. On a Thursday in April, after the accounts had been settled and the office was quiet, he came by at the end of the day. He had his hat in his hands, which was not his usual posture. He stood inside the door and looked at her at the desk, and said he had something to say, and he preferred to say it plainly. She put the pen down. He said the operation ran better with someone who understood the accounts from the inside, and he said he had a house that had been missing something he had not known how to name for several years, and he said he had not expected to say any of this in this particular office in April, but he was saying it. He said, I would like you to stay in this valley permanently, as my wife, if that is what you want." He held her gaze and did not add anything, and did not reach for something to fill the silence. She sat at the desk in the late afternoon light, with the ledger open in front of her and the pen in her hand, and she thought about the East County and the 4 years since, and the particular tiredness of carrying a thing alone and waiting for the moment when it would be used against you. She thought about a man who had heard the whole of it and said, "You did nothing wrong," which was the true thing, and had not required anything back for the saying of it. She set the pen down. She said yes. That was what she wanted. He let a breath out slowly. He said he was glad. She closed the ledger. She put on her coat. He held the door. They walked out into the April evening together, and the main street of Sutter's Crossing went about its business around them, unhurried, indifferent, entirely unchanged. And she looked at it and found that she did not mind being seen in it. They married in June. Gerald Foss gave a brief toast and looked at his hands afterward, which was the most emotional she had ever seen him. Celia Granger came to the wedding and brought a covered dish and behaved as though she had been a supporter of the arrangement from the beginning, which Ida received without examination, because she had more important things to do with her attention. Berta Cole sat in the front row and nodded once when Ida came down, and then looked at the minister, which was exactly the right thing to do. She kept the cooperative accounts through the harvest, and into the second year and the third. The error she had found in the seed account had resolved itself, and its resolution had been mentioned at the annual membership meeting as an example of the kind of careful work the books now reflected. And Gerald had said this without looking at her, and she had received it the same way. On a morning in the second autumn, she was at the desk before the office opened, working through the September settlements, when she found herself at John Pryor's account 7, and she looked at the entry she had made, and the entry was correct, and the figure was exact, and the decimal was carried properly, and she looked at it for a moment longer than it required. She thought about the 4 years before Sutter's Crossing, and about how she had carried a thing alone until it had become so familiar she had stopped, knowing it was heavy. The stove in the office was working against the October cold, and the lamp was good, and through the window the main street was just beginning to show its morning. A horse at the rail outside the feed store, smoke from the hotel chimney going straight up in the still air. She picked up the pen and moved to the next account. The morning continued around her, ordinary and sufficient and entirely, finally hers. And that was the story of Ida, who carried a truth alone for 4 years and found the one person who made the carrying unnecessary. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.